We're with Professor Avram Ehrlich, with Pharaoh, Moses, Aaron, and the children of Israel in the desert. And we want to learn more what's happening.
Actually, you missed out on the most important protagonist in the entire biblical story. The Levites. They are the center of attention in this story. The redemption of the Levitical or the Levite tribe, which was criticized and by their own father, and not cursed, but rather destined to be a wandering, nomadic entity. And they were considered to be wild and undisciplined. And here, all of a sudden, these wild and undisciplined people are coming into a situation of leadership. Moses has an opportunity. He is obviously a great intellectual, and he's had an epiphany in the desert after 40 years. He understands what he can do. He's clearly in contact with another class of people. And that it's critical to understand that in the future interpretation of the Bible, the angels are a class of tower watchmen, of master craftsmen, of codists, communicating over long distances. They are delegants, they are writers, they are sages, they are builders. They seem to have worked for the pharaohs and for the kings and for the aristocratic courts. They built, they damned. But most important, they trained the animals, they trained the birds. The whole biblical story of Noah is the knowledge of the cycle of the animals and the cycle of growing and breeds and species. So they were deeply in tune. So when Abraham comes in contact with the angels, this was really a highly educated and sought after class. And it appears that they are mainly Hittite. And the Hittites also had a circumcision ritual. And Abraham comes into contact with the Hittites. He bought the Hebron, his burial place for his wife and for the entire dynasty from a Hittite, and seem to have made an alliance early on. And we also see Hittites a few hundred years later in the time of David, where Uriah was a Hittite, and the Hittites were very much part and parcel and mixed in with Israel. And they seem to have brought a class of master craftsmen. And these could be the Malachim, and the integration of this group of people into Israel seems to have been through the Levite, because the Levite took over the work and became known as they preserved the knowledge of the tabernacle and all the tools of the tabernacle, and they carried the tabernacle. And eventually, later on in the biblical history, much later on, the entire Levites became the center of the ritual, or the temple ritual, and the center of prophecy. Samuel was a Levite, and obviously Moses was a Levite. The whole prophet, the idea of the interpretation and the law, came from the Levites. So it's an incredible metamorphosis, a transformation of the Levites from being the most violent and undisciplined to then not only transforming but actually completely reinterpreting and becoming a people of the law and refined. But you see also when Moses, it sums up in this parasha, it sums up that Moses is the 83. There's an entire portion of his life which is not known. And that portion was when he was in Egypt, and what he discovered in Egypt, which made him turn in such a radical way. And it appears that he discovered the archives of Joseph. Archives of Joseph. Joseph told the story of his father, Jacob, and his grandfather, Isaac, and his great-grandfather, Abraham. And we see that the burial ceremony that he led to Hebron was so elaborate that the entire nations around were talking about it, and he spent 70 days mourning Jacob, and the history of his ancestors were told and buried with him. And Joseph and Moses, it is obvious, found that because Moses was committed to Joseph personally. He took the bones of Joseph when the entire children of Israel entirely forgot about him. He was the one that found the bones and took them out and caused them to be buried. So the connection between Joseph and Moses is whilst it's never mentioned once, it is definitely not mentioned. But it is so obvious, and once one presumes that obviety, then one understands that there is a story happening here, and the best way to call it is to read between the lines. This is almost like a military codex, and it seems to be a military codex of the Levites. That the Levites, the whole story of the Levites was a military battle of the most cruel and the most ironic proportions. You will recall that the children of Shechem raped the sister of Levi and Simeon, and they wanted their revenge, and in negotiations they agreed that Tamar could be bought or could be married to the person that raped her, and in return they would circumcise themselves. And when they got circumcised on the third day, they were slaughtered, the entire family. And so here the Levi, the person who goes and kills, he uses the instruments against his enemies. He causes his enemies to circumcise themselves. And when they can't defend themselves, he slaughters them. That Levitical cunning seems to be playing here with Moses. And you see here, in this scene behind us, where Moses, he's 80 years old and Aaron is 83, almost like the elders of the Levites. And they're standing before the magicians of Egypt. The firebrand Levi, criticized by his father, his descendants are standing before Egypt with the magicians and the wise, and they are holding a staff in one hand, a staff of the snake representing knowledge and represent biological species and the knowledge of and on the other hand, Aaron's staff, which would turn into a crocodile, into a large reptile. Here you have two introducing of species into the Nile, and you've got the introduction of medical, or perhaps biological, or perhaps staff of Moses that turns into a snake is the symbol of knowledge. It is a symbol of the mastery of the biobacterial cycle. It is the symbol of the relationship between species and the use of one species with another species. It is useful here, and it has been demonstrated here because there is a biological war about to occur. There is going to be let loose a plague, it seems, on the Nile, which is going to cause the frogs to escape the Nile, and is going to cause them to die after a period of time, and then to smell, and then to cause boils, and then to cause bacteria, and perhaps the bubonic plague. Perhaps the bubonic plague had been cultivated by the magicians of Egypt, because the serpent is a demonstration of the knowledge of plagues and viruses, and they were being deployed very, very clearly here and also in other war arenas. So it seems here that Moses, if he were demonstrating the war technique of the Levites, it seems that he was using the skills and the tools of the Pharaoh against him. How would he do that? He would have to know the arts of the magicians and the wise people. And in this text behind us, there are two curious words. It says, the magicians and the wise people, belahotem, in their enthusiasm, in their fervor, in their heat. He apparently understood how they would behave, and he tricked them, it seems, to actually to repeat the plague, perhaps even to unleash their own biological weapons that they stored, that the Egyptians stored, on to their own people. So that would be consistent with the military warfare of the Levites, and it seems, and the most bizarre scene which is described, where Moses and Aaron and Pharaoh and the magicians are standing together, and there are the communication, it seems, between two different two rods, the rod of Moses and the rod of Aaron, almost two linguistic systems. Now, in addition to that, you see something curious, that Moses is in contact with, we know the Tetragrammaton. But the Tetragrammaton, we also know, it says, I am God, I appeared to your fathers as Elohim. And we know that that word Elohim is also a synonym with the angels. So, in fact, we can gather, were this to be some sort of below the surface suggestion, we gather that Moses is in contact with the angels, with the Malachim. Who are these Malachim? They apparently are a guild, perhaps even an army, because they're referred to as armies. And later on we see that they use a lot of military, not only technical but also military techniques. But here, if one just presumes something very, very obvious, that they were communicating with each other, teleporting, basically communicating with codes. We know that that's what was being done by fires and by drums and by lights and by doves and pigeons and homing pigeons, that they were communicating between one place and the other. And we see that Aaron goes to meet Moses on the mountain of God. If that is the mountain of God, then it's also the mountain of the angels. And if they're the angels, and they are communicating. And therefore, and how did he know where it was of all the mountains? Because it is a known it is a known base, a military base or bastion or position held, which were held along the trade routes and along the king's road. And we know that there were actually codes of law about the watchtowers, the Hittite codes regarding how the watchtowers and how the guards would have to function and interact, and all the disciplines that they undertook. These are well known codexes which would require communication. So if Moses is in fact communicating, and Aaron is in fact communicating, and these staffs play a role in that communication, then what is happening? And if in fact they are able to intercept the communications, then that's an incredible strategic advantage that they're playing. And it does seem that that's what they're saying to each other, that they're communicating. You will do this and I will do that, and this is one sign and that's another sign. And were there to be other people or other factors or other agents within this which are just not mentioned, then this is very significant. This is not just two people. This is a military devised military plan of great proportions. Now, this can all be very fictitious, except that the very characters that we're talking about appear later on. The angels appear in the story when when they're crossing the Red Sea and and the chariots of the Pharaoh are sabotaged and to cause them to stop and and then eventually another technique, dam building, which the angels, these engineers would have mastered from the Euphrates and to the Nile. So dam building was a part and parcel of the knowledge of the ancient Near East. And if you can build a dam, then you can collapse one on an army. So one gets the sense that this scene is of incredible strategic drama, which is being which is taking place here.